All right, well, I'm really pleased to bring in my first guest, Leader of the Nationals, David Littleproud. David, thanks so much for joining us here. I want to talk to you about The Voice, but before we get to that, I have to ask you about this bizarre story I saw today. Apparently, the Australian War Memorial is now using gender-neutral pronouns to refer to fallen soldiers. Now, a lot of veterans I've spoken to are absolutely furious about this, and I reckon they're right. Surely the AWM owes our servicemen and women, living and dead, better than this sort of critical gender theory.
Oh, totally. And in fact, Matt Anderson, the director of the Australian War Memorial, reached out to me to make it clear that this isn't their policy. And I'm glad to hear that, because I was very concerned when I saw this report. And I respect Matt deeply for the work that he does. And as a former serviceman, he takes his role very seriously. It was an individual who took licence that didn't have the authority to take that licence with pronouns. And I can tell you, the only silver lining out of this is that it has shone a light on the nonsense that carries on in some of these institutions. And I'm glad to say that Matt Anderson gave me a personal assurance that this wasn't correct. There's no change in policy, and there was no intent for changing policy around the pronouns of this sort of stuff moving forward. They'll continue to respect and honour our servicemen the way they have in the past. And I think I take him on face value, and I take him that he will follow through in that. And I think that's a good thing for our country and for those, and to honour those that have come and served for our nation and paid the ultimate sacrifice in particular.
That is fantastic news, and you heard it here first, everybody. The pronoun police can stand down at the AWM, so that's really, really good news. Now, I want to move on to The Voice here, because that is the other really big story of the day here. And on the weekend, of course, everybody saw Peter Dutton released a letter to the PM saying Australian people deserve more detail on The Voice. What did you make of Prime Minister Albanese's reaction that this was just a culture war stunt?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's an appropriate place to discuss the details of something as intricate as The Voice at a fundraiser for breast cancer. That should be shown the respect it deserves. The letter in which I understand Peter Dutton has sent to the Prime Minister is very detailed, 15-odd questions in which he wants answered from the Prime Minister about The Voice. Now, the Nationals got to a principled position before those details that we don't support it because it's another representative body, one in which we've already had before. We've had a representative body before that will simply lay another layer of bureaucracy between closing the gap, and particularly for us, the Nationals, who represent regional, rural and remote Indigenous Australians, it'll put another layer of bureaucracy between them and real outcomes. This is simply something that we've seen before. There's no malice in what we're saying. We're just coming from this with real intent that this should be about the bureaucracy and the machinery of government working better, not sending a couple of Indigenous Australians from regional, rural and remote Australia that would represent hundreds of thousands of kilometres with communities that have diverse challenges but also opportunities to Canberra and think that they can adequately represent all those Indigenous people. There are already 227 voices to the Australian Parliament for Indigenous Australians. 11 of them are Indigenous, but they are there for all Australians, and that's the principal position the Nationals took from the start. If the Liberals want more detail about the mechanics and the machinery of The Voice, well, that's their prerogative, and we respect that. And I've got to say, Peter Dutton's been very respectful to the Nationals and the position that we've got to, but we'll respect where the Liberals get to. I think the Prime Minister would do well to try and bring Peter Dutton with him on this journey, rather than to try and call him out. If he wants more voices in the yes camp, then that would be, I would have thought, the smarter way to handle this. But the Nationals have made a principled position very clear, and we don't intend to change, but we'll respect those around it, because this should be a respectful debate. This should be something that this should be deeply personal to each Australian. We're just asking them to respect where we're coming from, and we look through this through a unique lens where many of your viewers from metropolitan areas wouldn't understand. And we're not saying we understand what happens in cities, but please just understand that we come to this through the lens of trying to make sure that we close the gap, but we believe that we have the machinery that can do that already. It's called the Parliament, and the 227 senators and members of Parliament are there already. The 11 that are Indigenous proudly have done it on their own volition.
Well, that's right. And I mean, I think, we're getting a tone of that sort of respectful debate that Anthony Albanese called for when, we see people being shut down as rednecks or racist when they ask, I think, pretty legitimate questions about, a pretty major change to their constitution. But another issue was brought up today, and we've spoken a bit about it in different ways on this program, was brought up today by Senator Jane Hume, who also said that how the referendum is conducted is basically as important as the referendum itself. And she said that the fact that they weren't funding yes and no itself, like they did in previous referendums, was a pretty important tell about the lack of real honest debate the government wants. How disturbed are you that the government is not funding yes and no like they did in 1999? I think it's pretty arrogant. Am I wrong?
Well, totally, and this goes against what Australians are. Australians are fair people. They're fair people that just will make an informed decision on the information put in front of them. But we only saw last week where there are organisations that hold immense power in the media, like social media companies, that are prepared to influence the information that's being dispersed. We have a different media landscape than we did the last time we had a referendum, and that's why it's important that there is equity and that if we want to validate the decision of the Australian people, that the Australian people should be given all the information in a fair and transparent way, and that should be funded equally so that there can be no recourse on the outcome, that Australians can say that they've made that decision and we accept the decision because it was done fairly and transparently. I think ultimately Australians are fair people that will look at this a little cynically and will simply say, I'll go and have to try and explore the information myself, but I don't think that a responsible government should do that. If you're asking the Australian people to make a very, very important decision, and it is a personal one, but an important decision about the future of our country, they should be given the tools and the information to be able to make that in the sanctity of their home, to be able to do that in a personal way that they then get comfort with. And when a government doesn't provide that environment and infrastructure, then they've failed. And so it's important that the government reconsiders this and the Australian people are given all the information in an equitable way, a transparent way. And I trust the Australian people, even if they don't agree with me. The Australian people will get it right.